What can we learn from studying our genealogy? Hi, I'm Thomas, and welcome to my channel. I do educational videos. Normally, I do videos on Tree of Life, and if you'd like a quick intro to Tree of Life, just click the link below, and I'll send you a free copy of an intro there. But today I'm going to be talking about genealogy. Now, this story starts about 15 years ago for me, and it started when my father, just a few years before he died, he told me that the Newsomes have never been slaves. Now, my last name is Newsome. He said the Newsomes have never been slaves. And I was a grad student had just finished grad school in history, and so I had been inundated with all kinds of slavery history, and all my life I had just assumed that I'd come from slave background. So when he said that, I was rather surprised, and he mentioned his grandpa Joe, and that he said his grandpa Joe wasn't a slave. I have a pretty old family. I go way back. My grandfather was born in 1881, and so his father Joe was born way back in the 1840s. So he told me that his grandfather had never been a slave. And so I was like, wow, I don't know. Let me do a little bit of research and see what I could come up with. So I did some digging, and I ended up at Paul Heinig's website, Heinegg. And Heinig's website is called the 500 Free Black Families of North Carolina and Virginia. And he's come out with a book since then, and extended to a few other states, but he does a lot of genealogical work on all of those 500 families. And so I looked at it, and the Newsomes were on there, as well as the Artises, which is my grandmother's side of the family on my dad's side. So I was like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And he pointed me in a few different directions, did a lot of research into my family, and was a very valuable resource to get started with my genealogy. I still haven't read all his stuff. I've really just read all the free stuff that I could find online. But the reason why I really want to do this video is to share this information with other people too, because it's had some impact on my life. And there's most black people, I think, just assume that they came from a line of slavery, and probably they do, but there are, just give you a description of some of the names that are actually on this list. We've got Adams and Allen, Anderson, Andrews, Anthony, Avery, Armstrong, Arnold, Ashby, Ash, Atkins, Atkinson, Bailey, Baker, Ball, Bannister, Banks, Barnett, Barrow, Bartlett, Bass, Bates, Beckett, Bell, Bennett, Benson, Berry, Beverly, Bingham, Bolton, Bond, Bowden, Bowers, Boyd, Braxton, Britton, Brooks, Brown, Bruce, Bryan, Bryant, Burke, Bush, Butler, Bird. Now, those are only the A's and B's, and those are only some of the A's and B's. So, I think I know of an African American with every one of those last names. And, there's plenty more where that came from. So there's a lot of people that probably have a lot of free black, descended from free blacks in Virginia and North Carolina, but they don't know it. And so I'm actually going to put all 500 of those names in the description to this video, So you can look at the description and see if your name is there or if somebody you know's name is there. And please share this video, send it out to those people if you see their name there. Because there are some very, very common names, and I would guess that there's probably millions of African Americans who fit in under this category. So anyway, going to Heinig's research, I learned that I guess the story goes back to jolly old England, and that's where the Newsome clan originated. And looks like the Newsomes go back to way back in the 7th or 8th century, although I think there's a town that's called, now Newsome can be spelled many different ways. I spell it Newsome. A lot of people spell it Newsom, Neusom, Nwsham, where the H is silent. Many other variants. I think they're all pronounced Newsome, but they're spelled in many different ways. So there in England, there's a township there that's called Newsome, I think Newsholme. And there's also a town called Newsome. And the first person that I could dig up with the name was a guy named, I think, Robert de Newsome in 1193. Then there's also the Newsome House, or a Newsome Hall, that originated in, I believe, 1445 and housed at least seven generations of Newsomes over the next 200 years. One of the Newsomes there in 1502 was granted a coat of arms, and I've got a couple of those here, different coat of arms. I think that's kind of like a nobility title, but yeah, this is the Newsomes. Again, that's spelled H-A-M, but pronounced Newsome. And here's another one. That's a little bit more colorful. Don't know exactly, but I think the more coat of arms you have, like the further back you get an update on the coat of arms. Perhaps some of my British friends might be able to fill me in on exactly how that works. But yeah, so there were a lot of Newsomes there, but also included in that was I think his name was Robert Newsome, and he was born in 1614. And I believe he was given a land grant by the king to come over to the New World. And so he came over to Virginia in approximately 1645. Now, I don't have that nailed down because I have seen other research where it was actually a guy named John Newsome who came over in 1630, so to Virginia. And there was a son that was born, William Newsome, in 1648. Some people that I've seen on the genealogy site say that this William Newsome was the first Newsome born in the what was to become the United States. Now, this was in the Virginia colony, which was the first permanent colony in the United States that became the United States in the New World, North America. And the colony began in 1607. I think William Newsome actually married into the Spencer family, or married a Spencer, and the Spencers originated way back in 1607, which is the beginning of the Jamestown colony. So the Newsomes go way, on the English side of the family, go way back to the beginning. Now, I think William's grandson or great-grandson was named Moses Newsome. He was born in 1709. And around 1730, he married a free black woman named Judah. So Moses and Judah were married about then, and over the course of the next 15, 20 years, they had 4 children. and they were all classified as colored. So there was so that was interesting to learn that there was an actual legitimate marriage in early 18th century Virginia between a white man and a black woman, and they had 4 children. They were all classified as colored. So that surprised me. But then in addition, I thought about it and I was like, well, who the hell is Judah? And what was she doing as a free black in Virginia in 1730? And so I didn't have really a good answer to that question. I just had thought that the vast majority of blacks who had lived in the South in the colonial period, early colonial period, were enslaved. Now I knew there were some free blacks. I didn't really, but I hadn't been doing genealogy on them, so I didn't really think that wonder where they came from. Now what I discovered was pretty interesting. So, and this is a strong hypothesis. I don't have all the proof and I don't have any of the documents. I haven't been to any archives or anything. I've just dug online and read a few books that I have on history and so on. But it looks to me like Judah originally came from Angola. Now you see Angola is down here in Southwest Africa. It is the majority of the slaves came from the slave coast here further up, kind of on the area of Africa that juts out to the far west. But Angola's way down here. And so that's already somewhat anomalous that Judah comes from Angola. And the reason why people say this is, well, the 2 people that I'm relying on mostly for this are Paul Heinig, who did that site, and then also Tim Hashaw, Hashaw, who has an article on what he calls the Melungeons, and he traces their origin to Angola. He really says that about 99% of all free blacks that were living in the U.S. in the colonies in this period originated from Angola. Now, the reason why is that goes back to, I guess, the age of exploration, and in particular, Prince Henry the Navigator, who in the 15th century started looking for a quick route to get over to China. Same kind of impulse that Columbus was following when he sailed to the west. Prince Henry sailed south, or tried to get around Africa to go there. But on the way, they had some encounters with African peoples, and it looked like, especially in the Congo, which is a little bit north of Angola, the Portuguese had some kind of relationship there, and there was a lot of missionary activity, and a lot of they believe the Catholic Church was established in Congo in like 1491, and then there was a King Alfonso of Congo who began to welcome Christian missionaries in the early 16th century. And so a lot of the people in Angola and Congo had been converted, some by force and some voluntarily, to Catholicism at that time. Just as an aside, it looks like the Newsomes that were in England were Catholics. It's not really related to this, but these people in Angola also converted to Catholicism. A lot of them in Congo and Angola by the early 16th century and into the 17th century. So, and the Spanish were also there. A lot of the Spanish Jesuits came there. And so they were both really eventually looking for slaves for their colonies in the New World. The Spanish had a colony going in all over the place, but in particular in Mexico. And the Portuguese had a colony in Brazil. And so there were some slave ships that were going from Angola and Congo to those areas in the New World. But this really got ramped up in about 1618, where there was a general named, Portuguese general named Vasconcelos, and he put together a campaign to forge into the Angolan interior, the highlands there that are off the coast. The coast port town is called Luanda, and he moved in from Luanda and went into the interior looking for slaves. He enlisted with him another tribe there that was called the Imbangala, and the Imbangala were like Satan worshiping cannibals, and they were like marauders. They lived to raid and pillage and eat other people's camps, and they were ready to travel at a moment's notice. Any baby that was born amongst them was buried alive so that they could be light on their feet and be on the move immediately. And so somehow Vasconcelos from Portugal was able to make a deal with the Imbangala, and they went into the Angolan interior, and they seized thousands upon thousands of Angolans, and the ones that they didn't eat showed up at the port in Angola. It looked like it was about 50,000 people. And so that's, hundreds of slave ships worth. Now, one of these slave ships, which was called the Bautista, sailed in 1619 from Angola, and I believe it was headed to Mexico. And around close to Veracruz, Mexico, the ship was actually hijacked by British and Dutch pirates and taken over. And the cargo of the ship was put on both of these other ships, but specifically the Dutch ship, which was called the White Lion. And so Captain Jope, who was English, but he was on this Dutch ship, was the ship's captain, and he steered the ship up to Virginia, to the Port Comfort there at Jamestown. So they showed up in the port in Jamestown in late August of 1619. And they were carrying a cargo of what was called 20 and some odd negars. Negars was their cargo. And that kind of rang a bell, because when I was in graduate school for history, my first, I think it was the first day, it was a seminar for U.S. colonial history, and we learned about the 20 and some odd negars, who were the first Africans to set foot in the New World, according to what I had learned. So these 20 and some odd negars were sold into to the Virginians for corn, and they were more or less sold into indentured servitude, because there wasn't slavery yet. Slavery had not been established. The Virginians had just learned how to grow tobacco. They had been starving there for years. Then that colony was flailing. A lot of times the Indians had to help them, to keep alive through the winter. And there was no established system of slavery in British North America yet. They were at least a century behind both the Spanish and the Portuguese as far as, slavery as a business in the New World. And so the cargo of the ship, the 20 and some odd negars, were sold into indentured servitude, which was, which is what I learned was the fate of most Europeans that came to the New World, is that they were in indentured servitude, which was 7 to 10 years of labor. And then after you're finished with that, you were able to, they gave you a little plot of land and they gave you some livestock and some tools, and you were able to start off on your own. So what that meant is that these Angolans who were there, many of them were already Christian, many of them already had Portuguese names, and they were, within 10 years, they had their own community there of free people. So there was a free community of Angolans living in Virginia right there. But not only that, over the course of the next 100 years or so, apparently privateering or pirating was a pretty lucrative business, and some of these pirates actually specialized in hijacking Portuguese ships coming from Angola. And over the course of the next century, probably hundreds, definitely dozens, but probably hundreds of other slave ships were hijacked on the high seas on their way to either Mexico or Brazil, and rerouted, and the cargo was taken to Virginia. And so every so often, there would be a new influx of Angolans from Angola in Virginia. And the free colony that was, the free community that was already there, was kind of served as a bulwark, or a protection, so that the other Angolans that showed up there were able to kind of avoid slavery, even after slavery had been established, which wasn't until probably 1670 or 80. So there was a kind of a 50-year period there where slavery was really disorganized, and there was a burgeoning community there of Angolans, and then the future ones that came were able to kind of, in many cases, avoid slavery too because of that. And they called themselves Malungu, Malungu, which means shipmates from a common country, approximately, in the Kimbundu language. So these people spoke a language in Angola called Kimbundu, and Malungu was what they called each other. So there was this whole Malungu community there, and of free blacks in Virginia throughout the 17th century and even into the 18th century. Now, Tim Hashaw wrote his article on what he called the Melungeons, and that's these people eventually became known as the Melungeons as they migrated. A lot of them migrated west to Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio, and some of them ended up all the way out in Louisiana and Texas. They usually traveled in very large groups because they were free people, but they were subject to being kidnapped by slave traders. And so they traveled in very large groups to avoid that fate. And a lot of the modern scholars and even some of the Melungeons today thought that they had their ancestry was Portuguese or other Mediterranean. Well, I guess Portugal is not necessarily Mediterranean, but other Mediterranean ancestry, or even South Seas ancestry. That's where they got their darker color from. But and this has kind of been in the news a little bit lately. Some studies have been done on DNA and everything, and have determined that the Melungeons most likely are African, have African descent. It looks like it would be Angolan descent. But that's not I guess not totally germane to my story, but so that's where I believe that Judah comes from, is that she was a Malungu, and that she had somehow ended up in Virginia, originated in Angola, ended up in Virginia, and as a free black, and then somehow met Moses Newsome around 1730, and they got married. Now, in the early period, from 1619 until the late 17th century, there was very little kind of it was mostly class and not race. There was distinctions made by class, and so there was little distinction between like an indentured servant, whether they were white or black. They kind of intermarried with each other without any type of stigma, and they once the Malungu people were able to get their freedom, they could hold public office, they could own land, they could own white servants or buy white servants. They were able to be on the jury and things like that, serve in military, in the militia. And so it wasn't really until the late 17th century that laws started to be passed that discriminated against blacks. I think the first was like in 1660, but I think in 1691 there was a law that forbid intermarriage between whites and blacks. But even for the first maybe 50 years after that, the law was largely ignored and unenforced and unenforceable. And so it just continued on for through that period. And I guess my great whatever grandparents who married in 1730, even though it was outlawed, it appeared to be, that the law just wasn't really enforced because it was open and it was recorded. So now these Moses and Judah had 4 children. They're all classified as colored. Interesting enough, I believe 3 of them served in the militia and served in the Revolutionary War. They were all born, I believe, between 1735 and 1750. And 3 of them, I believe, were given land for their service in the Revolutionary War. So, black soldiers in the Virginia militia. And interestingly enough, if you go into a much later period, I believe there was a Newsome who was executed as participating in the John Brown slave rebellion, and also the Nat Turner slave uprising. I think Nat Turner was in about 1831. John Brown was in like 1859. Don't quote me on those numbers, but so even though the Newsomes were a free family, they fought for first they fought for the Revolution, and then they fought against slavery in a period after that. Now, what's kind of interesting and dovetails with that a little bit is that I spoke with my aunt, my dad's older sister, about this, 10 years ago or something, and she said that Grandpa Joe actually was a slave, but that he ran away when he was a teenager, and he ran to and sought shelter in the Newsome household. So he was adopted by the Newsomes. So he wasn't so I'm not really a Newsome by blood. I don't know if that's true or not, but according to that story, my Grandpa Joe ran away from slavery, escaped, and ran to the Newsome household. And so he was able to gain his freedom that way. And so that does make sense that the Newsomes, again, were fighting against slavery, even though they were already free people. So that's another part of that story. There's many, many other rabbit holes that you can dig around and go into. But I just wanted to do this video first just to raise the consciousness of people, that especially African Americans who have one of those 500 last names, that you probably have a good deal of history, because most African Americans, and I know this growing up, that we just assume that we came from slavery and it's anonymous. We'd never be able to trace back our genealogy. I grew up, when I was very young, the movie Roots came out, and they talk about all ends of that's a very fascinating book, but we most likely think that our genealogy is kind of off the table and that we can't study it. But it looks like, at least for those 500 free black families, there's a lot of information that you can gain. Now, I don't know that if I would have known this story early in my life, what kind of impact it would have had on me, if any. I think it would have probably had some impact, because I definitely, I grew up in pretty much an all-white neighborhood in the Midwest, and even though I experienced very little racism from the white people there, I still kind of felt inferior because I was the only one that didn't look like everybody looked different, and so if I would have understood that I had free black ancestry, I might have thought about it differently. I don't know, but I do think that it's the truth. If it's the truth, you probably want to dig into it a little bit more. So, like I said, if you've watched this video, and I'm gonna put the 500 names in the description, and so you can take a look at those names. And if you'd like to share this video, if you know anybody with those names, share this video with them, and please leave some comments in the description if you have any more information on the story. I know that I've omitted certain parts, and I'll probably do a part 2 to this video at some point. But I just wanted to kind of get the off the top of my head version out there, and over the course of time, I'll do a little bit more digging and see if I can come up with more particulars on the subject. Okay, well, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll be back with some more Tree of Life content if you want to get some of that, and also click the link below if you want me to send you the free Tree of Life guide. Okay, thanks.